Hey, yo, AMP, we're doing respiration system with Thug McD. Part 1. Okay, so what are the functions of the respiratory system? First off, we've got external respiration. Oversees gas exchange from the blood to the external environment. Then we've got internal respiration. Exchange of gas taking place within the lungs and the alveoli. Then, finally, we've got passageways to the lungs to purify, to warm, and then we have to humidify the incoming air. So, respiratory organs. We've got our nasal cavities that talks about our nostrils and our oral cavity that both combine into our pharynx, or what we call our throat. Then we have from our throat going into the larynx, and then we got this trachea that is very, very strong. It has layers of cartilage so it doesn't break. Then we go into our bronchi, then into our right and left lung, and then finally we got down here below the lungs our diaphragm. So, upper respiratory system. Well, we've got two different types of sinuses up here. So you have a sinuses that's above your eyes, and then you have a sinuses that are around right here. And then you've got some concha, which are going to be folds or little walls inside of your nasal cavity. And then you've got your external nares or your nostrils. Nares and nostrils are going to be the same thing. Then you've got your hard palate of your mouth and your soft palate of your mouth. We've got the epiglottis here that folds over our larynx so we don't choke. Over on the other side, we've got some auditory openings that go to the ears. We've got our nasopharynx, which is between the nasal cavity and our actual pharynx. We've got some internal nares or internal nostrils that connect the actual back of your throat to your nasal cavity. You've got your uvula, which is going to be our bolus measuring, remember that food globule, to make sure that you don't choke. And then we've got down here, we've got our esophagus going behind our trachea. Okay, so when we look at the anatomy of the nasal cavity, we've got those lateral walls that have projections called the concha, or the nasal turbinate. There's going to be 3 of them here. And they increase the surface area, they increase air turbulence within the nostril cavity, they warm the air, they filter the air because they have sticky mucus all over them, and they can also cool blood due to evaporation of the water in the air. So, our sinuses, what do they do for? Well, they lighten our skull, so they're hollow, actual cavities. They're resonance chambers for speech, and they produce mucus and drain down into your nasal cavity to help, again, filter out the air. So, our pharynx. We have 3 parts that we're going to be looking at. We've got our nasal cavity, then in between the nasal cavity and the pharynx, we have our nasopharynx. This basically starts where the soft palate begins and where your opening of your throat actually begins. So right in between here is going to be our nasopharynx. And then we move into our pharynx. Our larynx, or our voice box. So it channels food and air with the epiglottis. It does air vibrations through the vocal folds to create sound. And guys tend to have this Adam's apple, which is a thyroid cartilage box around it that actually protrudes a little bit more than female. But again, that's going to be your voice box. Air flows through it, vibrates those folds, sound comes out. And the denser the cartilage, the deeper the voice. So your epiglottis. So again, the epiglottis is the flap of cartilage located in the throat behind your tongue, in front of the larynx. It covers the larynx when you swallow so that you don't choke. Okay, our bronchial tree. So our bronchial tree starts after the larynx. And you might want to write this portion down. This is who goes to what and where and how. So we start with our trachea. And our trachea takes a little while and it comes down to this main branch. And it does a primary branch to the primary bronchi. So each one of these is going to be a primary bronchi. Then it branches into secondary bronchi, which are these bigger ones, that branch into tertiary bronchi, which are these smaller ones, that branch into bronchioles, which are even smaller, and then finally to our terminal bronchi. I would know that order if I were you. Okay, trachea or the windpipe is about 4 inches of tube connects to the larynx with the bronchi, and it's reinforced with C-shaped hyaline cartilage. Remember, cartilage is very hard to compress, and so is your trachea. It's lined with ciliated mucosa, or little hairs, that beat continuously in the opposite direction of the incoming air to expel mucus and trap dust. So when looking at our trachea, behind it we have our esophagus, which is, remember, you swallow and that's where the food goes down. Up here we have a C-shaped cartilage here that is very, very hard to compress or break. Then inside we have the lumen of the trachea. Over here we see that it's a rigid inner layer that has a ciliated mucosa. Again, the mucosa is covered in a type of mucus to trap air and dust, and it's ciliated with little hair-like things that push the mucus up so that the dust and other particles don't reach the lungs. Again, this is what it actually looks like. These are the little hairs that beat backwards. So our primary or main bronchi divide the trachea and enters the lungs at the hilum or the medial depression. The right bronchi is wider, shorter, and straighter than the left. The bronchi subdivide into smaller and smaller branches from here. So again, we see our trachea into the right and left bronchi. Our lungs, they occupy most of the thoracic cavity, and the apex is near the top or the clavicle, and the base rests on the diaphragm. Each lung is divided into different lobes by fissures. So we have our left lung that has 2 lobes, and our right lung that has 3 lobes. When we look here, again we can see all these branching and branching and branchings of the bronchi. And when we talk about the coverings of the lungs have an inner layer, a middle layer, and then an outer layer. This inner layer is known as the visceral pleura. It covers the inside layer. The parietal pleura is on the outside layer that touches the thoracic cavity. And in between is pleural fluid that fills the layers in between, allowing them to glide past each other. So, the respiratory zone. Once we get to those terminal bronchi here, we have one more branch into the respiratory bronchioles, and then we branch into our alveolar ducts that have our alveoli on them. Well, the alveoli have these sacs, and the alveolus are these sacs where exchange of gas occurs, where we actually transfer oxygen from the outside environment into the blood, and the carbon dioxide from the blood back into the lungs so that we can breathe it out. Well, here are the 10 review questions, and that's all I got for you today. So see you later.